Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about a wild one. We're going to be talking about The Substance. This movie is directed by Coralie Fargeat, starring Demi, Margaret Qualley, and Dennis Quaid. And like I said, this is an absolutely insane and unhinged film that is completely wild. That when you watch it, you're probably going to be extremely grossed out and horrified at the things that you have seen that you'll never be able to truly unsee about this film. And that's kind of the really entertaining aspect about this movie, is the fact that it really goes all out with its concept, which is of course about an aging model who has kind of, reached the age where she's looking back at her younger self, her younger, successes that has kind of faded away into the background of her life. And when she's offered this opportunity to take this substance that essentially splits yourself into two and creates a younger, more beautiful, and more perfect version of yourself, she takes that opportunity despite all of its rules and challenges that she has to face throughout this film. And of course, when you set up a bunch of rules in a movie like this, the character is going to end up breaking all these rules to see how bad things will spiral out of control. And again, this movie goes in so many different directions that I really wasn't expecting. It is definitely a film made by a French director, and I cannot wait to talk about so many aspects of this film, even though I think that maybe some of its thematic elements could have been stronger if it was a more subtle movie. I'm still glad that this movie went all out with this wacky concept and its just insane and unhinged direction that it goes in, especially in the last 20 or 30 minutes. And so if you haven't had a chance to see This Substance just yet and you have the stomach for it, I would highly recommend you go check out the film and then come back here and let's get into full spoilers for this movie, because I do want to talk about all the little details inside of this crazy and insane story. So the first thing I do want to talk about when it comes to this movie is the actual core concept itself, because I do think that is one of the most alluring aspects of this film. Is the reason why I wanted to see this movie in the first place, because when you have a story like this where you can create a younger, more perfect, and more beautiful version of yourself, and you have the model be the main character, and you have this weird sci-fi type of concept to kind of, base it all in, what does that look like? How does it work? What are the rules? It's all extremely interesting to follow, and I think it's really visually defined at the very beginning of the movie when it shows, this vial of the substance being injected into an egg and the yolk kind of splits into two. Or you have the other visual metaphor of the two, or like the ball of clay that is kind of all messed up and lumpy, and then you split it into two and you roll that second one back into a perfect little sphere. And now you have these two different things that are still from the same thing. It's still cut from the same cloth essentially, but now you have two different versions of it. You are still one. You can have this new version of yourself, but you have to switch back every 7 days or else things can go wrong. And so when you set up all these rules and you set up this concept and you set up this really gross visual of how a person can split into two like this, how can things go wrong when you break those rules? Really, I think the direction here from Coralie Fargeat is the part that really does draw me into this concept once again, because if you haven't seen her, directorial debut with Revenge, that is a very stylistic thriller. Of course, it has a very difficult first 30 minutes to watch, but once you get into the actual revenge aspect of it and the satisfying manner in which that film ends, it is a great thrill ride to watch, even if it has a lot of difficult scenes to watch. And I think that is even more so applied to this film. There's a lot of very uncomfortable and very just awful things that you're watching happening on screen, especially when it comes to the first splitting of the main character of this film, Elizabeth Sparkle, where she takes these substance and it splits her into two, and her back kind of opens up like a zipper on the back of a dress, and you have this other version played by Margaret Qualley just kind of flow out of her back. It is really, really gruesome and gross. And when you look at both of these films that Coralie Fargeat has directed, you can very much see that this director has a stylistic stamp that she's putting on both of these films now that I really do enjoy. And even if you're watching the most horrific things on screen like I have just explained to you, it is still extremely entertaining to watch, even though you are curling up in your seat and kind of just wanting to puke the entire time. But of course, having a distinct style and a wacky concept and story to a film is not going to be everything. You of course have to have endearing characters and performances. That's where you get Demi and Margaret Qualley, who are playing Elizabeth Sparkle and the new version Sue in this film. And I found that Demi Moore's character and her performance was absolutely phenomenal in this film. You'll hear from pretty much every single review of this movie that it's a very brave performance. I think that's what a lot of people are saying to this, because she really puts herself out there in this role, and it is a really challenging thing to put yourself in, is to put yourself in a mindset of a character who clearly is not happy with herself when it comes to her career or her, her looks, her appearances, her aging, her, ability to be starring in all these things that she wants to be in, and the societal pressure that she has on all these things, especially when it comes to Dennis Quaid's character, who is this film executive, a character that is very just really gross again when it comes to those insert shots that this director really does love. The insert shots of him eating his food, the shrimp, and just the sound design behind all that is just so gross and disgusting. But really, it's his view on this character and this view of the world that I think is just so disgusting, and that pressure that he is putting on to this character and how she kind of sees the world because of that pressure that he has on her is kind of what shapes this character's entire downfall. But it really is heartbreaking to watch a character spiral out of control in the way that she does does in this film, especially when it comes to one particular scene in this movie when she's getting ready for a date. And at this point, she's already taken the substance. She's already split herself into, you know, the Elizabeth Sparkle character that she is in the current time and the Sue character that has kind of split off and has been, you know, hired by the Dennis Quaid character. And she's essentially replaced herself and she's become extremely popular and she's doing all the things that she wanted to do. And now this character is kind of abusing her power, because another rule that was set up at the beginning of the film is that this character has to essentially stabilize herself with spinal fluid every once in a while that is kind of injected, or I guess ejected out of the back of the other character, which is really disgusting. The visual of that is just so, it's seared in my mind, especially when things get pushed further and further. It's really, really gross. But the 7-day kind of runtime is there's only enough spinal fluid in the back of this character and only enough food to keep the other character alive for you to only last 7 days before you have to switch back and kind of, you know, rejuvenate all those spinal fluids back before you can have enough, you know, material to be able to stabilize yourself for another week. And so when you have this character try to push that and go beyond these 7 days, it's kind of making the Demi Moore character age and slowly rot away. It starts off with just a finger, and so now you have the Demi Moore character who is, you know, starting to see that this other character might, you know, start sucking the life out of her essentially and making her age more rapidly, and having this problem that she wanted to solve become even more dire. And she's trying to see if maybe she can stop this procedure, maybe go out on a date and see if somebody like this other random guy that she encountered earlier in the film can see her as the most beautiful woman in the world, even though she has gotten to an age where she doesn't see herself as the most beautiful woman in the world anymore. And when she's getting ready for this date, she's, you know, trying to put on makeup and she's looking in the mirror and she's, you know, decides to go out, but then she sees the billboard outside her window of her younger self just kind of mocking her this entire time. She goes back and, you know, reapplies her makeup and she goes back out to go on this date, and oh, she doesn't look, you know, pretty enough, and so she goes back and gets a scarf. And it's just that self-doubt and that, you know, ashamed nature of her character not being the younger self that she sees as better at this point is really heartbreaking to watch. I think that was one of the most thematically resonant parts of this entire movie. Even if I don't have a specific ability to relate specifically to that scene, I can tell that this character's journey through that entire sequence was easily one of the most heartbreaking and effective moments in this entire movie. And that is all again to the credits of Demi Moore's performance as Elizabeth Sparkle in this film that I thought was really, really strong. I've heard some people, at least before I watched this movie, say that maybe this movie can get some awards consideration from the Academy. There's no way in hell that this movie will be considered by the Academy, and if it does, I'll be really shocked, because again, this movie is so weird and out there. It's very much a French film. The gross aspects and the body horror aspects of this film and how grotesque it gets, especially when it comes to the last act of this movie, feels like the Academy is going to keep its arm's length, because I feel like they're very specific on more, I guess, generic types of films. And since this is so out there, I have a hard time seeing that this movie will get the recognition that it does deserve when it comes to the performances. But either way, if she does get recognition, she very much deserves it. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Margaret Qualley as the Sue character, who again is a younger, more beautiful, more perfect version of this Elizabeth Sparkle character who's really feeling herself. And right when she is essentially birthed out of the back of Demi Moore's character, and she's kind of looking at herself in the mirror, and you're in literally her perspective inside of her eye, seeing herself for the first time. You're really put in the shoes of this character who's like, oh my god, this actually worked. I can really, you know, take advantage of this. And she gets the job with Dennis Quaid, and again, she's doing all the things that, you know, she thinks that she needs to do in order to be back at the top again. And this really gets to her head, and she feels like she can't go back to her older self because of the pain that she, you know, kind of has when she goes back into that body, because she literally has her spine ripped open at the beginning of the movie. And so the more you are this younger, better version of yourself, the more you want to reject that older version of yourself that you don't want to be anymore. And this, I guess, conflict between these two characters, I think, is really interestingly crafted inside of this film. I think the problem that I have with Margaret Qualley's, I guess, role in this movie is the fact that it has a lot of lingering shots on just her body, and so many, I guess, sequences where she's doing the jazzercise thing with the television program that she's on that is run by Dennis Quaid, and it's very repetitive. They show that dance performance and that, I guess, you know, workout routine so many times throughout this entire movie that it's almost exhausting to see that as many times as you show it. And I feel like you could have had a lot more to this character experiencing these things besides just, you know, going to work and doing these dance routines, and maybe, you know, having a fling with some random guy, or, you know, starting a relationship with somebody else that's just kind of introduced as an idea later on in the film, but we don't get to really explore how she feels about that. Even though Margaret Qualley is great in this film, I just thought that her character was more so just the idealized version of this character that didn't really have much of an identity on her own, which I think that's also kind of the point that the film is making, but I did want a little bit more from that version of the character. When it comes to this actual story and the way that it is told, I feel like the director had two different options and two different directions they could have gone down. Of course, they could have had the version that was a little bit more grounded, that was kind of more so the first 2/3 of this movie, that is kind of that ideological battle between these two characters, that power struggle between the two, and have a lot more sequences like that, you know, getting ready for the date sequence where you're kind of comparing and contrasting these two different things and that power struggle between the two of them. And maybe you have a sequence at the end of the movie where you have Demi Moore realize that she was wrong and she learns her lesson, and she stops and she terminates this other version of herself and she learns to be comfortable in her own body. Or you have the version that, you know, kind of goes wild and crazy, that goes all out with its concept and its gore and with its, you know, style and with its, I guess a little less care for characters, a little bit more care for the, I guess, wacky story that it is actually telling. And I think that is the version that we got instead. And when it comes to the last 30 minutes of the movie, I think that is where it almost makes it worth it, because this movie gets so wild and ridiculous and over the top and almost campy to a certain point that they just went all out on it. Nobody told Coralie Fargeat no. Nobody told her that she could not do that. Nobody told her that she's going too far with the ideas that she had in this film. And I think it almost makes it better for it, even though there is a more grounded version of this story, a more thematically resonant version of this story somewhere within this film. And it's funny, as I was watching this movie at the theater, there was a fire alarm that went off and the movie was paused and stopped at about the hour and 45-minute mark. And so I had just seen the part where, you know, Demi Moore's character has kind of, I guess, like she's rotted away to a certain point, where there's a lot of great prosthetic work that is with this character and how vile that she does look after the Sue character has kind of, you know, absorbed so much of the back fluid from her, to the point where she's been Sue for months on end, and now this character has kind of deformed to a point of unrecognition, and she kind of goes out and she decides to cancel the subscription, and she decides to end it all, and she gets her final package to terminate the Sue character, and she goes ahead and terminates her. And I was like, okay, I feel like there is a version of this movie that ends right here. She has learned her lesson. She has kind of gone down this really terrible path, and maybe there's a way to reverse it and go back to how she was, or maybe there's not a way to reverse it. I don't know how crazy this movie's going to get at this point, but it felt like a place where this story could have ended. I feel like if this were a Sundance movie, a lot of Sundance movies end in that way, where it kind of gets crazy, but before it kind of goes all out, it ends, and it kind of ends a little bit more abruptly and doesn't really reach its full potential with its wacky concepts. And, you know, when the fire alarm went off and it kind of stopped at that moment, I was like, that could have been a full movie, an hour and 45 minutes long. I don't know what in the world they're going to do for the last 30 minutes here, but I felt like that was a good ending point. But of course, once the movie was resumed and you get to see that she kind of, you know, backs out of it and decides to rehook herself up and to try to, you know, run the blood again and try to reactivate this other version of herself and try to bring her back to life, she wakes up while the older self is also still awake. And now they're both conscious at the same time, which I was like, yes, if the movie ended before this, I think that was a missed opportunity, because to see these two characters like physically interact with each other, both conscious, that is such a more wild story to go down. And I was like, okay, now all bets are off. The rules are now broken. Nothing makes sense anymore necessarily, but now we can go wild with this concept. And that's exactly what they do with this film. It gets absolutely insane. I think the fight sequence between the two is really funny to see. Margaret Qualley literally kick Demi Moore's character across a room is extremely over the top and funny. It was really just darkly comedic how they were fighting and how this all went down. But once the Sue character literally kills the older Demi Moore version, I was a little bit sad, because I do like Demi Moore's performance in this film, even though she was unrecognizable at this point with all the prosthetic work. Her character was a lot more engaging to me at this point, and so I was a little bit bummed. I was like, okay, let's see where this goes. If you kill that older version of yourself, does that then start to, I guess, kill the younger version? Are you going to be able to survive without, you know, having the nurturing nature of your actual physical body that's kind of birthed you from the very beginning, which is what they said when you take the substance? Like, you cannot kill this other version because you are one that kills a part of yourself. What is going to happen after this point? And she literally starts to fall apart, and it was very nightmarish how they accomplish all of this. And I'm sure a lot of people have had this very same dream, but have you ever had the dream where your teeth fall out and you're literally just like reaching into your mouth and pulling a tooth out one at a time, and it's really horrific and it's very terrifying to see just your teeth fall out in that nature? I've literally had that dream several times, and to see that in this film was probably the most relatable aspect of this movie to me, because it was a nightmarish sequence where you're kind of seeing yourself in this light, or you're seeing yourself literally fall apart in front of your eyes. And it was horrific, because she's reached the point where she has been invited to host this New Year's Eve bash, this New Year's Eve, you know, big performance. This is the height of her career. She never got to do that when she was, you know, the Demi Moore character in the past, and so now this younger version of herself is getting that opportunity, and now it's all falling apart in front of her eyes, and she's, scrambling to go back, and maybe if she can inject herself with the activation pod again and birth another better version of yourself from that, maybe you can get it all fixed and maybe you can solve it all. And this is again the spiraling of this character just absolutely losing her mind at this point. And when she does take that activation pod and her back splits open once again, and out crawls out this monstrosity that I think the title card literally said Monster ELISABETH. This combination of the two of them, there's Demi Moore's face on the back of this monster, you have Margaret Qualley, and all this really gross prosthetic work. And I think this is the point of the movie where, again, if the first half was a little bit more grounded in reality, the second half is very fantastical. It's very much it's almost to a point of absurdism, and I think that's also what the director said, is she wanted to make something that is so absurd when you're kind of comparing these beauty standards and when you're kind of deconstructing it and how the world sees you, how absurd it can be, and how, following all these rules is as crazy as it is, and if you break it, then you are now this monster that is, something that you cannot look at, that you cannot bear to just stand anymore. And I found all that to be extremely powerful once you get to the end of the movie, but also really campy and quite funny because it is so over the top, it is so gory, that it almost makes all the really gross and uncomfortable stuff that you watch for the first half of the movie that is genuinely difficult to watch. It makes you very queasy. If you're eating while watching this movie, it's probably not going to work out for you. But when it comes to the end of this movie, it reaches so far out of the realm of reality that it almost becomes tolerable at that point in the movie. And so I think it has this weird balance of a grounded story at the beginning and this really over the top story at the end of it that makes the overall experience a lot more balanced than I was expecting it to be. And of course, the monster ELISABETH is going to go back to the studio and go back onto stage and be, confronted with the entire crowd essentially just screaming and being revolted against whatever this monstrosity now is, and to see them try to kill her and try to attack her, and they literally bash her head off, and her head grows back because she is this monstrosity of a creature now that is just really gross and just really interestingly visual, and the arm gets cut off for some reason, and blood starts spraying everywhere in the crowd, and is one of the bloodiest and goriest things that I've seen in a while. But again, it was darkly comedic as well, the campiness of this entire sequence, and seeing Dennis Quaid's reaction to all of this, and his reactions throughout the entire movie was so over the top and corny, and his show me a smile part earlier in the movie was so in your face. And of course, we know what the movie is trying to save, painting this character as he is. I think his name is literally Harvey in the just his character name is literally Harvey, which I guess is as on the nose as you can possibly get. But I feel like the movie, and its in the face nature of it, is really trying to make a point of being in your face, because how else are you going to tell the story? How much fun are you going to have telling a story like this? There are very subtle versions of this type of condemnation of Hollywood's beauty standards in other films, but this movie is not one of them. This movie is going to be in your face because it is more entertaining because of it. And I found the entire just gory blood fest of the last 15 minutes to be absolutely wild and entertaining and really funny, and also just really tragic also to see this character go down this path, and she collapses outside, and her back Demi Moore face kind of slithers its way onto her Hollywood star walk of fame, that is just on the sidewalk there, and it just kind of deforms and spots and looks just like the ketchup that was dropped on it when the burger was dropped at the very beginning of the film on the walk of fame star. And so there's a lot of visual motifs and metaphors throughout this entire movie that I also found very interesting. Like I mentioned earlier, the back opening up and the birthing of the new version of this character very much is reminiscent of zipping up the back of a dress, or you have the visual of the Hollywood Walk of Fame star at the very beginning of the movie kind of age and weather over time, which is kind of how you're seeing the Demi Moore character over time. And you get to see the visual of the burger being dropped on it, and the bloody, I guess, whatever the corpse is that is left on the sidewalk being washed up by the street cleaner at the end of the movie, and how that all is kind of mirroring itself. And there's a lot of visual motifs like that kind of hammers home its metaphors and all these different meanings that this movie has, and all these again visual motifs that the director has put into this movie, the attention to detail and all this, that when you watch it multiple times, I'm sure you're going to notice a lot more things just on second watch, because this is a very detail oriented movie. This again is a movie where nobody told Coralie Fargeat no. Throughout the entirety of the development process, nobody told her that she could not go as wild as she went, and she went nuts for this movie, and I do think that we are better for it. But those are just going to be my thoughts on the substance. I'm very curious to hear what you guys' thoughts are in the comment section down below. Do you think they should have gone the more grounded approach to this movie, or do you think they should have gone all out like they did in this film? I think both versions, again, they work in their own right, but of course the one that we got is the super over the top and super wild and insane one that we got to see on screen. Were you able to handle it? Was it too gross for you? Are you not going to watch it because of the terrible things that I've described to you in this video. Let me know in the comment section down below. And of course, if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys leave a like and also subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I, of course, have my review outs for the remake of Speak No Evil. I also did a live stream talking about my favorite horror movies of the year so far, along with, upcoming movie reviews here in the future, like Never Let Go. I will be watching that movie later tonight, and I'll be getting that review out later on this weekend. Very excited for that one as well. I've heard good things. And of course, if you want the more, I guess, mainstream horror movie, that one might be the way to go instead of the one for the freaks, which I think is The Substance. So again, comment down below, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos just like this one. I hope to see you all in my next one.